Welcome back. I hope you are feeling excited and pumped up about group by. If that last lesson threw you for a doozy and it went a little too fast, no worries. This lesson, we're going to go a little bit slower and break down different questions and give you an opportunity to think like an analyst and convert a business question into a SQL group by statement. Keeping track of where we are in our outline, we've already completed our first part of the module, practice, practice, practice. And in this lesson, we are going to do think like an analyst. Let's get started. Now that you've seen a couple of group by examples done in the BigQuery console, we're going to go through a couple of questions, and it's kind of like a pop quiz spitfire. So I'm going to show the question. I suggest that you pause the video and you think about how you would create your SQL query. So let's get started. What is the average fare for each payment type? So first you want to think about what is going to be my aggregate function. Once you have that, then you want to think about, is there a column that I'm going to be grouping by? If it is, which one is that? And then build out what your query looks like. Pause the video, take a few seconds to think about that. Okay, let's see what that query would look like. We would do select payment type. We're going to average our fare. From is our taxi cab data. I just put table. And we're going to group by payment type. So we see that the average fare, this is our aggregate, what's being aggregated. And then for each payment type, that's going to be what's grouped by. Let's try another one. What is the total fare collected for each payment type and rate code? Same thing. Think about what you're going to aggregate, what you're going to group by, sketch out what your query would look like, and then we'll come back and review the answer. So for this one, we know that the total fare collected, that's going to be what we're aggregating. We want a total, so we're going to do sum of our fare for each payment type and rate code. So we want it broken out by payment type and rate code. So we put payment type, rate code, sum our fare from our table, and then we group by column 1, payment type, column 2, rate code. And if you don't like the 1 and the 2, you could also write out manually payment type, comma, rate code. Let's try another. How many trips and passengers for each rate code and vendor ID for drop-off location 265? So for this one, it's a little bit trickier than the others. So the first thing you want to do is we see, okay, so we want it for each rate code and vendor ID. So we're going to have rate code and vendor ID. This is what's going to be grouped by. Our aggregate functions are a little trickier this time. So we want to know how many trips and passengers. Passengers, we're going to sum up the number of passengers for each ride. We want to know how many trips each taxi cab took for a given rate code and a vendor ID. So what we would do is count vendor ID. We also want to zero in on our data, and we only want to look up drop-off location 265. So for that, after we do our select rate code, vendor ID, count our vendor ID for our total trips, sum our passengers, then we add in our where clause, where drop-off location equals 265, and then we do our group by. And this is something I haven't explicitly said before, but in the SQL coding language, your group by goes after your where. So it's select, from, where, group by. Let's look at this in the BigQuery console and see what it would look like. So we just did what we would call pseudocode, or just kind of sketch out what our queries would look like, converting it from a business question into a query. Let's look at what that would look like in the BigQuery console. So we want the average fare for each payment type. So I'm going to select my payment type. That's what's going to be grouped by. I'm going to average my fare. Can't remember what it's called, so we'll leave that blank for now. from my taxi cab data. Fare amount, okay. So I'm going to average my fare amount as average fare. And then I get my error again. It's because I have select list expression references column payment type, which is neither grouped nor aggregated. Payment type needs a role. Either he's going to be grouped by or he's going to be aggregated. We're going to group by 1. We're going to run. And so we see we have 5 different payment types. We found that before in our previous lessons. And we can see what the average fare is for each payment type. And it looks like they're all pretty similar, somewhere between the $11 to $13 range. Okay, I'm going to comment this out. What is the total fare collected for each payment type and rate code? Okay, so I'm going to get this started again. This time we want payment type and we want rate code. And we want the total fare amount instead of the average. So we're going to do sum. I'm going to change my name to total. We get this error again because we have our first one, payment type group by, but not rate code. So if I just type in payment type, rate code, and then I'll put in notes, can also do 1, 2. So we see for payment type 3, and let's order this actually, because this is kind of confusing. We're going to order by 1, 2. So order by column 1, order by column 2. That's going to organize our data, so it's going to be easier for us to look at. So we see for payment type 1, it has rate codes 1 through 6 and 99. And then this is the total fare for each type. We go down to payment 2, same thing. So for payment type 2, we have our 7 different rate codes, 1 through 6 plus 99, and then the total fare. And this is going to keep going all the way down until we get to rate code 5. So there you go. All right, last one. How many trips and passengers for each rate code and vendor ID for drop-off location 265? Okay, so this was a tricky one because not only do we have our group by, we also have a where. So what we want to do is we want to look at rate code and vendor ID. So I'm going to change payment type to vendor ID. And then because I changed this up here, this guy needs to match down here. So if I just do this right here, let's run it and see. What's going to happen is I'm going to get both of our vendor IDs, 1 and 2, and each of the rate codes. And this is for all locations. We're looking at the entire data, every single location we have. If we want to reduce that and we only want to look at drop-off location 265, we have to filter that. And the filter happens before the group by. And this is just something that you need to memorize and that you'll get used to as you keep doing your queries and will feel natural before you know it. So we're going to do where drop off location ID equals 265. And drop off location ID, if we look at our table, drop off location ID is a string, so that's why this 265 has these quotation marks around it. If I didn't have that, I would get an error saying mismatch in data type. Okay. So if I run this, we'll notice that these numbers are a lot smaller than they were before. And this is something that we did in our previous lesson. I could also add, if I wanted, drop off location ID. Since I added this guy up here, that means I need to add him down here as well. And why am I doing this? I'm doing this just so I can verify that, okay, I said only pull 265, but I still want to see it with my eyes. Is it actually 265? And there you go. So we have the vendor ID, the rate code, and the drop-off location ID. And the only drop-off location ID that we see here is 265. So there you go. We'll jump back to the PowerPoint, review a couple other things, and then we'll wrap up this lesson for today. So what are some things that we notice? We notice that every column in the select statement has a role in group by. Either you're being aggregated, sum, average, count, max, or you're being grouped by, which we would call rolling up to a level. Another tip that I have is whenever we see the word for in a question, we could change that to group by. So what is the average fare for each payment type? We have our average fare, that's our aggregate function highlighted in green. And then our group by is for each payment type. So we want to group by payment type, and then we also have to add it in the select statement up here. Let's look at another one. What is the total fare collected for each payment type and rate code? Same thing here. We have our total fare collected, that's going to be the sum of the fare, for each payment type and rate code. So that means we want to group by payment type and rate code. And so whenever we have our group by, it also has to be in our select statement. And so that's why these are highlighted here in yellow. They're up here too in yellow also. Another quick tip before we wrap up this lesson is how to know which aggregate function to use. So this is what I'm going to call your tip-off. When you see it in a question, in a business statement, whatever it is, this is where your mind should first go to. If I see something that says total, probably going to think sum. If I see average, run rate, some central tendency, I'm going to think average. How many? Count. Highest, max, lowest, min. So quick summary. In this lesson, we learned how to convert a business question into a SQL statement. We also looked at what that looks like in our BigQuery server using our taxicab data. And we learned words to tip off which type of aggregate function to use. In our next lesson, you're going to get a chance to practice some of these aggregate functions on your own. See you next time. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I would be so appreciative if you could like the video and subscribe to help me create more content for you. Thank you.